Good afternoon to all of you, and good morning to those of you who are far away and on the other side of the ocean. So welcome to this webinar today. It is a pleasure for me to speak about the notifications of final regulatory actions for banned or severely restricted chemicals under the Rotterdam Convention. The notifications are a key element of the mechanisms under the Convention, and we will see today how to fill them out and what is important to consider when a DNA has to send a notification to the Secretariat. So the structure of the presentation today includes key provisions of the Rotterdam Convention, and then the notification process, including the key players, and in particular the role of the DNA, the designated national authority, the Secretariat, and the CRC, the Chemical Review Committee. And then key documents, the notification form and the PIC circular. And then we will look at consequences of a notification, and at the end of the presentation at challenges that normally governments encounter with the notifications of final regulatory actions. And now the key provisions of the Rotterdam Convention. In Article 2, you will find a definition of banned chemicals or severely restricted chemicals under the Convention. In particular, the severely restricted chemicals are chemicals for which some uses are still allowed at the national level, and so this needs to be included in the form, as we will see later on. And then in Article 5, the procedures for banned or severely restricted chemicals, and in particular the responsibilities of the parties and the process to be followed. In Annex 1, we have the information requirements for notifications made pursuant to Article 5. And this is a very important annex because, as you will see later on, the Secretariat will check the notifications received for completeness against the information requirements of this annex. And then the Annex 2 criteria for inclusion of a chemical in Annex 3 of the Rotterdam Convention, because, as you will see, the notifications play a key role for the listing of chemicals under the Rotterdam Convention. Looking in more detail at the key provisions, Article 5 includes procedures, as mentioned, for banned or severely restricted chemicals, and in particular, the responsibilities of parties. So let's look at the responsibilities of parties. For existing national regulatory actions, the DNA is to notify the Secretariat when the Convention enters into force for that country. Excluded were those notifications already submitted when the Convention didn't exist, but the voluntary PIC procedure existed. For new regulatory actions, the DNA is to notify the Secretariat within 90 days from the entry into force of the regulatory action. And now further into key provisions, Article 5 includes the responsibilities of parties. And also Article 5 includes the process. In fact, notifications for final regulatory actions to be published in the PIC circular and be part of the information exchange must contain the information set out in Annex 1 where available. So the DNA is the authority that completes the notification of final regulatory action form, signs, dates the form, and submits it to the Secretariat. And now we look at Annex 1 requirements for the notification form. So the notification form is divided in sessions, Session 1, Session 2, and Session 3. In particular, we look at these 3 sessions in particular. The first session includes the properties, the identification, and the uses of the chemical to be included. In particular, the common chemical and trade names, the CAS number, and other codes like the GHS code or the harmonized code. And then the hazard classification. The physical, chemical, and toxicological properties are to be reflected in Section 3 of the form. Section 2 of the form is very, very important, and it describes the final regulatory action. It should include information specific to the final regulatory action, and in particular, the summary of the regulatory action and the reasons relevant to human health and the environment for the action. This is a key element of the information to be included in the form because it will be evaluated by the CRC, as you will see later on, together with other information, but this is key for the listing. So this part must be really complete and well described. And then the category or the categories, so a chemical can be a pesticide or an industrial chemical, the relevance to other states and regions, and other relevant information. In particular, alternative chemicals or practices. And this is also very important. It will be reflected later on if the chemical is listed in the DGD, in the decision guidance document. So when we look at the notification process, the parties decided to develop a template to facilitate the reporting of final regulatory decisions or actions. And the template is available online. It is divided in 4 sections. It mirrors information requirements of Annex 1, and it includes a box where it is important to reference information that should be used to support the regulatory decision. So immediately, it's not necessary to send the full information, but just to reference it. And as we have seen, it should include the reason for the decision. And this is an area around which probably the DNA later on will have to send more information, but initially it's not necessary to send the full information package with the notification form. And then later on, the DNA will be requested to submit supporting documents. And it's very important that these documents, though, are referenced in the notification form. So it is important to clarify that the Convention does not specify how to regulate chemicals or how to make a regulatory decision. This is a prerogative of the parties. But it does require that the final regulatory decision to ban or severely restrict the chemical to protect human health and the environment be notified to the Secretariat within the deadlines that we have mentioned before. So this is a key obligation under the Rotterdam Convention for all its parties. So now we summarize the notification process. If we divide it in steps, we can identify 4 steps. The first step, the party takes the final regulatory action to ban or severely restrict a chemical, and this is a prerogative of each party, is not a requirement of the Convention. Once this decision has been taken, then the Convention provisions apply. The DNA must complete the notification form, sign it, date it, and send it to the Secretariat. The Secretariat will verify that the notification is complete and it meets the information requirement of Annex 1, and we request supporting documentation. In the step 4, the summary of the notification is published in the PIC circular. So the summary of the notification is a very important part of the notification. And we will see that another key element of information in the notification is the information relating to the risk evaluation. In this in this part of the notification form, there must be a clear description of the basis for the risk evaluation underlying the national regulatory action. And the risk evaluation under the Rotterdam Convention is the hazard or the toxicity versus the exposure. Whether the hazard and the toxicity data can be taken from international reviews, literature of a review or another notification sent by another party, the exposure information needs to clearly relate to conditions that are prevailing at the national level, at the local level, in the notifying party. This is very important, and this is a key point. And when the notification is not complete with this information, we often see that the chemical cannot be listed because this part is not well described, the data is not submitted, and it's not clear if the decision has been taken, to ban or severely restrict the chemical, is taken for prevailing conditions at the national level, conditions of exposure, human health exposure, and environmental exposure. I stress this point because it is really, really important to provide and reference this data in the notification form. In fact, it's not possible for the CRC to list a chemical that is simply banned by a country without this evidence of a risk evaluation at the national level, as it is not possible to list a chemical and fulfill the criteria of Annex 2 if a chemical is simply banned to fulfill trade standards, for example, and not because of exposure, human health and environmental exposure and its effects at the national level. So when there is no data or enough data at the national level, what are the options of the parties who would like to conduct a risk evaluation or an hazard evaluation at the national level because of human health and environmental concerns related to the exposure to this chemical? Well, it is possible for a country to breach information. So the risk of the hazard evaluation completed in one country may be used by another in support of its final regulatory action. The CRC has developed guidance on the information that it would need to consider in determining that the conditions of exposure in one country which completed the original risk evaluation are similar and compatible with those in the notifying party. So this policy guidance is available online and in the training materials related to the CRC, but it is very important to mention that even though the risk and the hazard can be still taken from studies or from international reviews, in this case it is very important in order to demonstrate concerns on and data on exposure to have, for example, surveys on environmental levels that can generate concern, or to have studies, or to compare the effect of the chemical with another chemical that has produced a similar effect. Then you will find CRC working papers and CRC policy guidance on how to write the summary in the focus summary in the notification form, because the focus summary will be reflected in the PIC circular, and it's at the heart of the awareness raising mechanism under the Rotterdam Convention. Why? Because, as we will see, the summary summarizes the notification, ensuring that the adequate level of detail is provided so that the basis for the regulatory action is clearly presented to all the other parties. It should demonstrate how the notification fulfills the criteria in Annex 2. It should summarize key decisions and key findings with reference to the associated documents. It should be translated into English where necessary, and is not intended to replace supporting documentation, which must still be provided. But the reference to the supporting documentation can be included, it is to be included in the summary. And why do we say that the focus summary is at the heart of the early warning system? Because under the convention, each final regulatory action and with its notification that fulfills Annex 1 will be published and disseminated to all the other parties, who will start to see that a certain chemical has created concern in another party. In fact, now we look at why the notification of final regulatory action is also very important, not only for the early warning system under the Rotterdam Convention, but also for the listing of the chemical in Annex 3 of the Convention. In fact, if a country in the region X, if a country from a region X bans or severely restricts a chemical Z, notifies the Secretariat, and the Secretariat verifies that the notification fulfills the information requirements of Annex 1, the Secretariat will inform the world that each party that has banned and restricted this chemical Z in the PIC circular, and if another country from region Y bans or severely restricts the same chemical Z, notifies the Secretariat, and the notification is a valid one, then the Secretariat will send information to the CRC, because when two parties in two different PIC regions have banned or severely restrict the chemical and have submitted the notification of final regulatory action to the Secretariat, then the work of the Chemical Review Committee is triggered and the chemical may be listed in Annex 3. So what does the Chemical Review Committee do? It carries on an analysis, and in particular, it verifies that the information provided in the notification fulfills the criteria of Annex 2 of the Rotterdam Convention. And if these notifications do fulfill the criteria, then it recommends that the chemical is listed in Annex 3 of the Convention to the Conference of the Parties. Then the Conference of the Parties may agree or disagree, and if it agrees, it also considers the DGD, the decision guided documents that the Chemical Review Committee would have prepared, and the prior informed consent procedure is triggered because the chemical is listed under the Rotterdam Convention. If the chemical Z is not listed, it falls into a specific list of chemicals which are recommended for listing, but that the COP has decided not to list under the Rotterdam Convention. And these chemicals are listed in Appendix 6 of the PIC circular. We will see the PIC circular in more detail later on. So, as we have said before, the consequences of a notification are that the information exchange starts, an alert is sent to all the parties of a potentially hazardous chemical through the PIC circular and through the summary of the new notification, which is published in Appendix 1 of the circular. The list of complete notifications is published in Annex 5 or Appendix 5 of the PIC circular. It may lead to consideration by the CRC and a possible recommendation for listing in Annex 3, but the notifying party has an additional obligation, is to send the export notifications for such chemicals to all the parties to which, into which the chemical is sent and exported. So this is a very important provision, and it will cease when the chemical is listed under Annex 3 of the Rotterdam Convention. But until then, from the moment the notification is published on the PIC circular and announced as a valid one, to the moment it is listed, the chemical is listed in Annex 3, and a long time may pass because another valid notification should be sent and the CRC process is triggered and the DGD developed. Throughout this process, until the inclusion of Annex 3 of this chemical, the notifying party needs to send through its DNA the export notification. What are the challenges of governments in this process that we have collected from experiences and from several countries in all regions? Well, sometimes the final regulatory action is not part of the legal or policy framework. Sometimes the decisions taken are not well documented. This is a common problem. Or the underlying rationale in support of the decision is not available in the notifying country. The industrial chemicals are not regulated or are differently regulated from pesticides, and therefore information is very difficult to find about them. The DNA sometimes is outside the national regulatory decision-making infrastructure and has difficulty to retrieve the information needed to complete the notification form. The challenges for governments related to the DNA, so the challenges of the DNAs are limited knowledge of the process of notification, limited knowledge of what is the risk evaluation under the Rotterdam Convention. There is no clear link to exposure under the prevailing conditions for the notifying country, and this is a very common problem. And there's not good knowledge of how to use bridging information. There's no familiarity with the form. And then when the DNA is fully trained, the DNA often changes. So that the function remains the same, but the person performing this function changes all the time. And this is a challenge because training should be then received again. This concludes my presentation, but I wanted to share my desktop before I conclude to show you the website where you can find information and the notification forms, and the DNA can connect online and receive support for to fill out the form. Or the DNA can choose to send a notification in paper version to the Secretariat. I wanted to show you the website and also the sections of the PIC circular. So to arrive to this page, we are now on the website of the Rotterdam Convention. You have to click on procedures and then notifications of final regulatory actions. You will have an overview. and then you can click on the form and the instructions. You see, you can send the notification online. If you are a DNA, you have to log in, and the secretary will have sent you the password and the login. And then otherwise, you can choose to send a Word version. There are instructions on how to fill out the form, and then a database of notifications. I want now, since some participants are Spanish speaking, I want to go also on the website in Spanish. So again, procedimientos. Notificaciones de medidas reglamentarias firme. Generalidades, formularios e instrucciones. Cómo iniciar la sesión online y los formularios que pueden ser enviados directamente a la Secretaría. Hay aquí igualmente la base de datos de notificaciones de medidas reglamentarias con todos los químicos, un enlace al formulario. Ahora que estoy en el sitio en español, abro un poco español, voy igualmente a mostrar dónde encontrar el PIC circular. No está en el mismo lugar que en inglés. Voy a mostrarlo en inglés y después en español. So I go back to the English website, and I will show you where you can find the PIC circular. So it will be implementation and PIC circular. When you go to the English website, you can click on Spanish. And arrive to the same page, which you will find under Aplicación and Circular, CFP. Consentimiento fundamentado previo. So I go back to the English version, and I will show you the overview of the PIC circular. In particular, you can find here the description of the appendixes and what is included in them. Appendix 5 is very important because you will find all the notifications of final regulatory actions which are valid and were submitted to the Secretariat. In Appendix 6, as I mentioned before, you will find all the chemicals which are recommended for listed by the CRC and are not listed by the COP, for which the COP must reconsider its decision at each meeting. So this concludes my presentation.